policies, programs and projects. Projects across the country were halted for whatever reason, not only in the immediate preceding regime, but even dating back to 2002. In fact, statistics have placed the value of the stalled projects at 9 trillion, which is equivalent to our country's entire economy. The scenario is impacting and negatively on us because we have to pay cost of the delay to the contractors and even making the costs high in the long run. What plans do you have, Honorable Mudavadi, with regard to the stalled government projects, and possibly if you could give us a roadmap and even possibly timeline? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just start with the issue of devolution. It is true that when the country promulgated the 2010 Constitution, I was tasked with the function of ensuring that the initial legislation, critical legislations to facilitate and actualize devolution were put in place. Now, there is the issue of when can the national government perhaps intervene. And at that time, we looked at the question of 90 days because what we intended to achieve, and it still stands, is that the Constitution is very clear that there shall be the national government and there shall be county governments. And any intervention cannot be permanent. An intervention to undertake some corrective measures must be limited, targeted, so that the rights of those people in that county can be restored and they have the ability to govern through their county governments. That is why the intervention period was limited. The issue that we have seen, as in the case of the NMS, all I can say is that maybe we have to wait for the report of the Auditor General at the end of the day to bring out the details of how this particular intervention was run or conducted. But the initial findings that may be in the public domain is that the NMS itself has left a debt of almost 16 billion to the county government of Nairobi. And the nature of how they went in is such that they may not have followed proper procurement procedures along the line. But without casting any ill motive or on any particular thing, I think the report of the Auditor General will be very helpful for us to really discern the experiences of NMS in Nairobi, and also then be able to guide Parliament, guide Kenyans, and guide the county governments on any future interventions, because this is a learning process. We have had devolution now for 10 years. You may notice that even now there is no need, in my view, to have a ministry of devolution, because these are entities that are constitutionally provided for, and they should not be interfered with by the national government. But there can be collaboration, and there are mechanisms through the intergovernmental relations legislation that Parliament passed. There are ways that this can be done. On the issue of state corporations, there are many. I think we may be having almost 300 plus state corporations. So that is a portfolio that seriously needs to be looked at very, very critically. And I know this is one of the functions that will fall directly within my purview. And I can say that we'll pick up from the reports that are there. There was the famous report by the Abdul Kadir Committee. That is a report that has very useful suggestions on the way forward. But I'll also be saying that, and to also touch on part of the legislation agenda, I will really want to request Parliament to actually just reflect and realize that the privatization program in our country of some of these state corporations has actually stagnated. It has not been moving at all. And I'll be calling on yourselves and other critical stakeholders that this is dialogue that we need to have, so that one of the urgent pieces of legislation to kind of accelerate the process of reforming these sectors or the parastatals, that law be urgently be looked at and proper consultations undertaken so that some changes can be made there to improve efficiency and to also disengage the government from areas where losses continue to be incurred, and yet that particular entity may not be necessary to continue holding on to as the government of the day, because those are public resources. So these are critical areas. Each of these institutions will have to be looked at from a sector viewpoint and also from its individual viewpoint, and it is important that professional advice is really brought to bear in reforming the state corporations. So I've talked of an example of that as one critical piece of legislation. There are legislations that we will have to look at if we are going to have a hustler fund. It is important that the legal framework be determined quickly. We have to look at what are the existing funds. Are we duplicating? And if you're duplicating, what are the implications? So all these, as an example, would be again a critical piece of legislation to help in actualizing this process of providing greater access to credit by all Kenyans. There are laws that will be necessary, and I want to also appeal laws that will help in dealing with wastage and misuse of resources. These are critical areas that we can review together, and my target is to have legislation that will, to fast-track legislation that will also unlock the economic potential of the Kenyan people, whether in agriculture, whether in manufacturing, whether in trading. So these are the areas that I think we need to look at so that we can have institutions or private sector that is generating jobs as rapidly as is necessary. I want to state that in the issue of diplomacy, we as a nation will have to look more and more to economic diplomacy. Mr. Chairman, I can speak here while looking at somebody who has been the head of our diplomatic missions, business in the country for some time. But economic diplomacy is going to be very critical. What are our interests? We must quickly see how we can benefit from areas like the African Continental Free Trade arrangements. We must look seriously at enhancing our presence and our footprint within the East African Community region, whether you're bringing in the DRC, South Sudan, and how we can network. We must also play a very significant role because for economic diplomacy to work, there must be peace in this region. So we must be more aggressive in dealing with the issues around Somalia. We'll have to be more aggressive in dealing with the issues even around South Sudan. And I can give an example. For instance, there's a road that the government of Kenya, with its partners, want to push all the way to Southern Sudan. But there is an issue right up there between Kenya's border and South Sudan that requires urgent political resolution, because that road is supposed to link. So the funding is there, but the process cannot be completed or pushed further because there's still some political issues to be dealt with. So these, to me, are going to be very critical interventions that need to be done. The diaspora, Mr. Chairman, the figures are in the public domain. The Kenyan diaspora, for instance, brings in place into this country almost 480 billion Kenya shillings annually. And the president has, in fact, in designating the issues around foreign affairs, has now brought the issue of the diaspora to the limelight, because that has now become a very critical constituency in the development of our country. We also have to take advantage of things like the climate change programs and play a leading role in those areas. They also provide a platform for a lot of funding if we can work well within those circles. So in coordinating matters around diplomacy, I'll be putting a lot of focus there, while also saying that we need to also continue strengthening our relations with our traditional partners, and make sure at all times the Kenyan interest is covered. We may even want to work more aggressively. There's been an attempt about Kenyans who are suffering in some countries when they get jobs there. These are issues that will require very serious and more robust and high-profile intervention to try and deal with that crisis, so that we can avoid seeing the things we see and we read about Kenyans undergoing very serious problems in different parts of the globe. I just want to repeat the issue around Anglo leasing. I want to state that that matter was canvassed in court. It was dealt with. It is behind us. And even the issues that came up, it was not too long ago that I read in the papers that indeed even those who were facing trial on some of these issues were acquitted eventually. So it was dealt by the court. And I want to state very critically that ministers, or for that matter cabinet secretaries, do not engage in procurement. You can talk about policy issues, but there is a procurement law that must be adhered to all the time. The halted projects or stalled projects, this is a crisis, and hence that very important committee of PSS and all the technical people, because we need to have a clear audit of these projects. It's clear that some may no longer be useful to the country, and therefore there's a very serious need for a detailed approach and professional approach to looking at these things, so that decisions can be made and appropriate interventions can be developed. And this also brings to question the serious issue of pending bills in this country, because very many businessmen contractors in our counties. You know them. Some have been crippled because they have never been paid for years. They are suffering. They have families. They have employees. They have loans in banks, but they've been crippled. So as we deal with this issue of stalled projects, one critical issue that we must also address fairly and in a balanced way will be the issue of pending bills in our public entities.
The Honorable Kaleba Misi, the Honorable Ferdinando Wanyonyi, the Honorable Shurie, and the Honorable Ikaria.